Liz, welcome to the Better Podcast.
Hi, how are you doing?
So good. So good to have you here today. So
Thank you.
I wanted to dive into your book, City of Girls. I don't read a lot of fiction, but when you put out a book, I make sure that it's on my Amazon and
Oh,
it's here when it's released. And first, I just want to say, probably one of my favorite fiction books I've ever read. Um,
thanks, honey.
and when I was finished the book, I mean, it was so hot and raunchy, and there's all this amazing stuff that we're going to dive into. But my brain always goes to frameworks. My brain is always like, okay, what? How did she weave this quilt together? So
Mm.
my first question for opening our conversation is, you know, when you were thinking about this book, and of course I know there's a lot of things in your life that were going on at the time. Was it the characters that came to you first? Was it the story? Was it working from working from the end result, which was answering this question from Angela, who were you to my father? How did you put this beautiful quilt of a story together?
First of all, thank you for that lovely review. I'm so I'm so happy that it delighted you. That's what I wanted it to do for people. I wanted it to transport them and delight them, and I'm very happy to hear that my work here is done. So thank you. To answer your question, so the novel is set in the New York City theater world of the 1940s. It's about a young woman who gets kicked out of Vassar, a young woman of extreme privilege who gets kicked out of Vassar because she's just a fuck up, basically, and her parents don't know what else to do with her, so they send her to live with her aunt Peg, who owns a theater company in New York City. And she falls in with a group of showgirls and playboys and dancers and actors and goes on a promiscuity bender. And the book is written when she's in her 90s, looking back at that period of her life and answering a question that she's received in a letter from a young woman saying, "What were you to my father?" The inception of the book has been with me. It's for certainly more than 10 years, but for a very great while, I have wanted to write a novel about female promiscuity. And that's where it all began, is that I wanted to write a novel about girls behaving very badly, girls using their beauty very recklessly, and girls engaging in recreational, dangerous, on the edge sex. Um, and not having their lives destroyed by it. Because there's a trope certainly in Western literature, of the ruined woman. It's a very great storyline. A lot of great operas have been written about it. Some of the books that I love the most in the entire world: Portrait of a Lady, Anna Karenina, um, Hedda Gabler, Emma Bovary. The list of women who made one wrong move sexually and had their lives absolutely destroyed, at least
Right.
kicked out of good society, if not murdered or
Mhm.
dead under the wheels of the train, or just ruined, absolutely ruined. And I wanted to write a counter to that book. As a female reader, as much as I love the writing in those stories, most of which were written by men, I also felt like I want to tell a very different story. I want to tell the story of the real story, which is that here's what it comes down to. If women's lives were automatically ruined by our poor judgment when it comes to sex and love, there would not be a woman left alive in this world.
Right.
And I wanted
Yes.
to tell this story, right? We
Yeah.
can survive, we can survive our own mistakes, and we can survive our own consequences. And I didn't want to write a fake, cheery, sex positive book that said that there are no consequences to living this way, because there are. But I wanted to say, you can actually not only survive the terrible mistakes and errors and misjudgments that you make when you're young and very highly sexualized. You may actually look back at that later in your life and be like, that was the thing that formed me, that that forged me into the person who I am today. So far from being the story of a ruined woman, this is the story of a woman creating herself, even through her own errors of sexual and romantic misjudgment.
I love all of that. And one of the things that I felt as I was reading the book was that these women had this natural curiosity, and despite the time, it's set in the 1940s, where we first meet the characters, or maybe late 30s. but they had this insane curiosity about it, but they also gave themselves the permission to explore it and figure out, you know, the things that they liked sexually, and then kind of going after that. So it was almost like predatory in a way. It was almost like, you know what, I'm just going to go after this.
Thank you for using that word.
Yeah, yeah, that's and
Thank you for using that word.
you're welcome. Yeah, that's what it felt like to me. And there was a scene, oh my gosh, I was literally laughing, like I was giggling to myself in a coffee shop. I felt ridiculous, but it was the showgirls were discussing what they thought virginity, like staying a virgin meant. And it was hilarious to me because it's literally the opposite of everything I've ever heard. It's like, they want the virgin. They want the that's what they prefer. And these girls were categorically, striking everything down. And I love that because to your point, when you talk about, I grew up watching these after school specials where the girl makes one mistake, she gets pregnant, and now she can't ever, graduate from high school or her life is over. And these girls had the complete opposite opinion around that. And I just wanted to thank you for that because I was like, oh my God, that's so true. Like when you know yourself better and you know what you like in bed, you're actually better in bed. You're not just like a limp, you know, whatever, right?
Yeah, I liked it when one of the showgirls says, like, when my character loses their virginity, and she says, "I can't believe I lost my virginity today," and her friend the showgirl says, "You'll never miss it," and she says,
Yeah.
she was right. Like,
Yeah.
I've never missed it. I've never wanted it back. And I think there's a novel I was reading recently. I'm sorry, I can't remember where it was because I'm always reading six things at the same time. That just said sometimes the loss of innocence is such a relief, um,
Right. Right.
that because sometimes you're simply better off without it.
Hmm.
Because innocence is very dangerous in a way. And I'm very glad that you used the word predator, because one of the things I wanted to do with this book was to write a story about young women who are more predator than they are prey.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that and that kind of girl has always existed, by the way. We
100%. Yeah.
100%. And she's
Yeah.
that kind of girl moved to New York City in 1930, and she moved to New York City in 1960, and she moved to New York City in 1980, and she moved to New York City yesterday.
Right.
And it's the girl who's taken a calculus of the world, seen what she looks like, and figured out how to use it as currency, essentially. And uh, that's who Vivian falls in with, and it's also just about learning the limits of what you can do with that, because she has a very good old time with it until she realizes that you can actually harm people with that. Um, and the book is less about her getting harmed than it is about her realizing that she can cause harm, and that's the maturing lesson for her as well.
Right.
So yeah, it's a slightly different book about sexuality than what I think is the typical.
And when we talk, I was watching your interview with Marie Forleo, and you both had gotten into a discussion around the Me Too movement and consent and how that contrasts with sexual desire. I would love if you can, just for a moment, describe or explain to the listener, what the difference is here and why that's so important. Because we live in this, maybe it's a post Me Too
Right.
era, but I love that this book was written now because we have, lawmakers and all things, in the States, we're taking away women's health rights. And I think that this is such a poignant book around, you can make, I think your tagline is you don't need to be a good girl to be a good person, right? And you can learn from
Right.
your mistakes. So maybe you can take a moment to explain the difference in your opinion between
Yeah.
consent and desire.
Yeah, I ended up, interestingly and accidentally, writing this book right at the peak of Me Too fever.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it was a really interesting moment to be writing a book about female sexual desire. A couple things. One is that I didn't want to infuse my book with any of the progressive woke values of this particular moment in history, because it would have made it false
Mhm.
historically.
Yeah.
There were women in the 1940s who were talking the same way that progressive woke people today are talking about female sexual justice, but they would have been a very rarefied group of small proto-feminist academics. these were uneducated showgirls. They would not have been able to have that language or that understanding. And so I just
Yeah.
had to be very careful to keep the modern tone out of the book and let them be who they would have actually been. The second thing I want to say is that I'm a huge supporter of the Me Too movement. It's a long overdue expression of female rage. And what I'm about to say is not a contrast to the Me Too movement. It's just me wanting to add a caution that we not forget that the beginning and the end of the conversation about female sexuality doesn't begin and end with merely consent.
Right.
Consent is, of course, the most important piece of it, but there's also such a thing as female desire. And if we focus only entirely on the question of consent, there can be a misunderstanding about female sexuality, which says that the women are passive creatures waiting for a man to come and ask for something that they either decide to give to him or not. And
Mhm.
that is not my experience with my own female sexuality. It's not the experience of a lot of people that I know. There is female sexual desire is a dark, and I don't mean sinful, I mean primal,
Primal. That's a great
deep,
word.
primal.
Mhm.
It is
Yeah.
a deep, biological, complex, messy, ungovernable force, and women themselves often don't know how to control or handle their own sexual desire. I certainly have been in situations where I don't know what to do with it. The world has never really known what to do with it. The world has always tried to legislate it,
Right.
control it,
Right.
suffocate it because it makes everybody uncomfortable. I think it even makes a lot of women uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And yet, efforts at governing it are futile because it is a massively powerful force that often governs us. And so I wanted to discuss that about the moments in a woman's life where she looks across a room, sees something that she wants, and goes on the hunt for it, in a very deliberate way, and also to show how women can misuse their sexual power and uh, and behave very poorly around it. And I don't want that to be lost in the conversation either, because then
I
we're not talking about equality. Real equality is also taking accountability for the shitty stuff that women can do around sex and around desire, and I know that firsthand from having done those things.
right. Right.
So yeah, I just wanted to keep the conversation, make sure that it stays open in that as well.
Well, I love it because it's a way or it's a medium for people to become more comfortable with the idea that there is a primal female sexual desire that we all have. It's a matter of tapping into it. I wrote an article maybe last year. The title of it was "Why Women Need Twice as Much Sex as Men," and in that article, I was geeking out on like serotonin pathways and like things in the brain.
Mhm,
I often will say, you give a woman the right environment, and she will chase sex like the animal that she is because her neurobiology requires it. Now, of course, you've
mhm,
done this essentially in this book where you are developing these characters and you are demonstrating that females can like and enjoy sex. It's not just the, oh, I'm too tired honey, I prefer chocolate over over the guy or over the sexual
mhm.
endeavor. So I just love what you've done with that as a whole. It's just magnificent.
Thank
um
you.
you're welcome. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, because I wasn't sure if this was an intentional through line, was this idea of community or chosen family. So, we were talking in the pre-chat. Giovanni was here, and community is a really big core value for Giovanni and I. We run Archangel, and we are always making sure that people come together, and it's not necessarily it's your bloodline. It's not the people that you're born into that become your family. It's the misfits and the renegades and the cast-offs that often can come along with you on your journey. Was that an intentional part of when you were writing it, is to think about this idea of community and how it can be so important for development, self-development, mental health, and just what a real journey might look like for someone?
Yeah, the most important relationships okay, the most important relationship in my life is my relationship to myself. And when I forget that, I pay a severe price for forgetting that. So let's start that. The second most important relationships in my life have been my friendships.
Mhm.
And I recently turned 50, and I had a birthday party with the 20 or 30 people who, around the New York area who are my closest and dearest friends. And I was looking around the room, and what I said to them was, look, I'm never going to have a 40-year marriage. It's too late. Like, I mean, unless I met somebody tomorrow and got married and we both live till 90,
Right.
I'm never going to have a 40-year marriage. But I'm looking around the room and I see some 40-year friendships that I've had, that I will have until I'm 90.
That's cool.
40-year friendships, 30-year
Yes.
friendships, 20-year friendships,
Mm.
and the intimacy, the great shared concern and care and tenderness that we have for one another, um, is is so reassuring to me, as other parts of my life may at sometimes be chaotic and overturned. Those faces in that room were the people who were there through all of it. So lovers come and go. In my case, husbands come and go.
Mhm.
Like people. But these people are my foundation, and I love my family, and I'm very tender with my family. But I don't have that relationship with my family, and I think we live in a culture that it's constantly, like most cultures will tell you, family is sacred, and it's the most important thing, and these are the people who will always take you in. If you're very lucky, you may actually have family relationships that are as good as the friendships that I've got.
Mhm.
I know a couple people who have that kind of relationship with certain family members, where they have sisters who are sisters or brothers or parents who are as close to them as my friends are to me. But um, my God, I don't know what I would do without my community. And it's a beautiful curated family. Um, and I mean, I'm talking to you from a beach house, that I've rented for the month as a birthday present for myself for my 50th birthday, that has just been a revolving door of these friends who I just want to spend as much time with as I possibly can, because we uplift each other, support each other, understand each other, and chose each other.
I love that. And I think it's so comforting as well to think that, if you grew up in a family that, maybe wasn't the utopian, situation that you were hoping for, that you can adopt family members as you go along. As you were saying, these 20 or 30 people that are just your people, they're not related to you
Yes,
by blood, but that doesn't matter at the end of the day. It matters who has your back and who loves you and who knows you, it not in spite of your darkness, but or your, dark bits, as you talked about it, but because of them.
right.
Yeah.
Inclusive of them. I have
Yeah.
a dear old friend of mine said the other day, I would say that you're like family to me, Liz, but for me, what that would mean is, if I said you were like family, it would mean I see you once a year, and the rest of the year I talk about how weird you are. But because he's like, that's my relationship with my actual family. You're better than that. You're like my best friend.
Oh, that's awesome. That's amazing. That's exactly how I want to be known. Not as family, but
But
just as
as
you
friend.
described there, not just at Thanksgiving where everything gets awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that you, just piggybacking on that idea you mentioned before around, your most important relationship is yourself. That was something else I thought you described beautifully in the book. It was sort of an undercurrent of, this woman, Vivian, she was labeled, she had all these, things that she was called, and then over the course of time she had this ability to have this self-acceptance and to know herself, all the light, all the dark, um, and to be open to whatever possibility, presented itself to her. So she, had this crazy journey, and she was still, able to know and love herself, which I thought was really clever. And I don't know if this was intentional or not, because I thought that there was a lot of parallels between Vivian's journey and potentially yours. In your personal life, you've been very public and gracious about, some of the challenges that you've had, but you have given yourself permission to be in alignment with your soul, and to, reject the narrow kind of, mold that we think about as what it means to be a woman. So I wanted to ask you, if you wanted to go there, what does it mean to you, and maybe some of the choices you've made in terms of how you've given yourself to be, permission to be in alignment with yourself, and also to,
Mhm.
and what you think it means to be a woman. Two part.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'll say that the word that I choose because it makes me feel safe and loved, um, and and able to take care of myself, is stewardship. And what's the difference between me at 50 and me at 25, is that it takes a minute to figure out how to do it, and to even figure out that that's the invitation,
Mm.
is that I have accepted fully, stewardship over this being, who I am.
Mhm.
Um, and for reasons that I will never know and you will never know, and any of us will ever know, we're all born into this insane experience of life on earth. It's such a weird event to be a human, to be an ape in with consciousness on a tiny spinning piece of debris in vast emptiness. What is this literally happening? Like, it's so bizarre. And um and and the way that I choose to see it, because this is the way that I end up taking the best care of this being, is to say, for some reason, mystery, randomness, higher power, call it whatever you want, source, handed me care of this one, and said, we're going to give you this one to take care of.
Mhm.
um, this body, this mind, these talents, these mental illnesses, these compulsions, these obstacles, these illnesses, this family, this culture, we're going to drop you into that one in this body. And we are giving you this one. I choose to think that they gave me this one because they thought that I could take care of it. And I see it as a really sacred invitation. And I elect to agree to that. And what that means is that I stay in really close communication with myself. And the best and simplest way that I do that is my most important daily practice, which is that every single day I write a letter to and from myself and love itself, capital LOV, love. Um, and it always begins the same way. And I do this every single morning. I did it this morning. I'll do it tomorrow morning. I did it 10 years ago. I'll do it till God leaves Chicago. And I just say, I need you, because I do. I need it every single day.
Right.
I start by saying I need you, and then love says through my hand, writing through my hand, I'm right here. And then I say whatever I'm feeling. I'm lonely today. I'm frightened. I feel overwhelmed. I'm ashamed. I'm full of desire. I'm scared. I'm tired. And love says, I can see that. I see that in you. And I say, what should I do? And love usually doesn't give me advice, but it usually just says, well, whatever it is you choose to do, I'll be with you. And the letter is just a repetition of that, year after year after year, of love just saying, I'm right here. I can see that this is a difficult moment for you.
Mhm.
What might make it easier for you? What would be a good thing for you to do today to help steward yourself through this day? And then I take care of that, and it's a very loving relationship. It's very tender, and I and an example that I can give of not conforming to what a woman is supposed to be. Um, I won't name names, but a relationship that I left once, I left because I was trying very hard as an advocate for myself, as a steward of myself, to explain to this person how I needed to be loved,
Right.
and to really break it down in a very simple way. Like, when I get like this, when this being in front of you who you see becomes agitated, vulnerable, and insecure, what I found over many years of practice really works is if you would make eye contact with it, put your arms around it, say really reassuring words, that seems to help. So
Mhm.
could you do that? That would be really great. And this person wasn't able to do that. And it was somebody who I loved a great deal, but just didn't have the capacity for that. And I just remember hearing a little voice inside me say to me, the steward of it, can you please get me out of here? This is
Right.
not a good situation for me to be in. And I said silently to it, I will get you right out of here. I will get us both out of here. It's going to take a minute because we're in deep. We live
Mhm.
together with this person. We've built a life, but I'm going to get you out of here.
Right.
And the very next conversation that I had, and this is how quick it's gotten now. The very next conversation I will have, when that voice says, "Wait a minute, this is not a good environment for me," will be whatever I have to do to get out of it. And so the idea of being faithful, loyal, or lasting to somebody else is something that I will no longer promise to anybody.
Mhm.
Because if that voice arises and says, this is no longer a nourishing environment for me, I'm bound by my contract of love to myself to get the hell out of there.
Right.
To be very honest, to be very clear about it, but to just say, I'm not. I'm not staying for a minute, in a situation that's not good for. If this being isn't thriving, and it's so quick now, I go from thriving to not thriving so fast, and I know when I'm not thriving because suddenly I'm not sleeping well. I'm not eating. I'm anxious. I'm insecure. I feel lost. I feel like there's no ground under my feet. I'm not my health is poor. I'm in a doctor's office asking for Xanax prescription again. When
Right.
that starts happening,
Right.
then it's time for me to ask myself what it needs. And what it usually needs is to go back to the things that are nourishing for it. Good
Mhm.
relationships, calm places, simple pleasures. Okay, I'm going to get you back, and I'm getting you out of this and back into that. And I really feel like the massive difference, and where a woman really comes into being, is when she can look at herself in the mirror and say to herself, I am an able and competent navigator of this mind, of this being and this self, and you are in good hands. I've got you. I've got you. And that's what I didn't have when I was 25, but who does? Very few people have that at a young age. It
Right.
takes
Yeah.
a while to figure it out. And my 50-year-old self says to my younger self, I'm sorry I didn't know how to take care of you before, but I hadn't met you yet. It takes a really long time
But
to
I
meet
haven't
yourself.
met you yet. Wow. But I
Takes a
haven't
long
met
time
you
to
yet.
build trust, to get to know yourself, and
Mm.
and to accept responsibility. And instead of cursing, for instance, my extreme anxiety that I'm hardwired to, instead of saying it's so unfair that I have this, I want somebody to take it away, I say to myself, this is the card we were dealt. I've learned some things over the years about how to manage that, and I've got you. I'm gonna make sure that you are not in situations that trigger this. I'm going to take care of you. It's not anybody else's job. It's my job, and I accept it not as a martyr, but with great honor.
And sometimes the anxiety is a blessing because I think what you've talked about is this mastery that you've been able to check in with yourself and say, okay, I'm in the doctor's office. I'm asking for the prescriptions. I can't sleep. I'm stress eating. Those are all signals. And they don't mean that there's not something wrong with you. It's just your body is trying to tell you we're out of alignment. And I can tell you from my own personal experience,
This
I found that my body,
this isn't working for me.
yeah,
Yeah,
this isn't working. And your body is so attuned to those things far more sometimes than your brain, because your brain has the algorithms and the logic and the, well, he's a good person, or if it's a relationship, like you justify why maybe you should stay versus why, but your
not
body's like, no.
sometimes, honey. Always,
Yeah.
always,
Yeah. I love that.
always. Only always is your body more attuned than your mind. Only
Only
always.
always, yes. It's a quarter to always at always o'clock. Yes, I got it.
And as for your definition, your question about what it means to be a woman,
Yeah.
even more important that you be attuned to that, because we're incredibly intuitive and we're incredibly sensitive.
Mhm.
And when a woman is out of alignment, she gets sick instantly. And so instead of now instantly going to the doctor or to a lover, and saying, fix this, I now say, what do you need, sweetheart? What do you need? What's the most powerful words in the English language that a woman can say are, this is not working for me. And
Yeah.
it's so beautiful because it's not accusatory, it's not victimy, it's not blaming, it's not shunting responsibility. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
Look at me. Look at me. I'm a mess. This scenario, this environment, not working for me. And then the promise, the commitment, the stewardship to say to yourself, I'm going to get you out of here. And it's not something that you do once. I'm the person who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. It's all about that. It's not like at the end of Eat, Pray, Love, I was done.
Right.
I had to do it again. I had to do it again 12 years later and say, I have to leave. This isn't working for me. I have to do this something else now. And I now know that I will do that as many times as I have to take care of this being. And now what I know that's different is that I don't make promises to anybody anymore other than to say that. My dear friend, the teacher Byron Katie, wouldn't marry her husband, Stephen Mitchell, until he allowed that their wedding vows were, I promise to love you until I don't. She
Mhm.
said it was the only honest thing that she could not, in her integrity, say anything other than that, because she was old enough to know that that's the only promise you can make to somebody. I promise to love you until I don't. And when I don't, I'll let you know. And I expect that you would do the same for me.
And those are just healthy boundaries, instead of, and one of the things I talk about with Giovanni and other friends is the idea of being selfish versus selfless. And being selfless and consistently giving to other people is the quickest way to burn out, resentment and falling apart. Whereas if you're being selfish, and not in the derogatory tone in which the word selfish is often portrayed, but being selfish is this is, like you said, this is just not working for me. That this being, this energetic, the resonance, the vibration that I have is not matching up with yours or this situation for whatever reason. And I love, the more women that I talk to who are, in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, as they are. And I had a patient who I just love. Her name is Sharon, and we still talk to this day. And she talks about how she came into knowing what she wanted and having the courage to just say it, to say this is not, rather than what society will tell you, to just sort of smile like the Stepford wife and be like, yeah, it's great. Yeah, I can like I'm going to overstretch myself, and this is going to be miserable. So yeah, the courage and I think the growth that it takes for somebody to be able to stand in their power and say, yeah, this isn't working for me, without any emotional attachment to it, I think is just
You just become a reporter. You're
yes,
just reporting a
yes,
fact.
yes,
It's a fact. Look
yeah,
at the evidence. My hands haven't stopped shaking. I've been crying every day for 3 months.
hmm
I'm not eating, or I'm overeating, or I'm assault eating,
hmm
or I'm using alcohol because I can't be in this environment unless I'm numbed. When you say this isn't working for me, all you're doing is reporting simple facts. And then how do you guide yourself? And I think a lot of times the reason people stay in situations where it's not working is they don't know what the next thing is. And that's why I
right,
think the next two most important words are not this. So it's like, well, what are you going to do now?
yeah,
I don't know, but not this,
right,
not this. You have to start with not this, and you might not know. It's okay to say not this before you know what the next thing is.
hmm
Your body, your mind will hear you say that, and your neural pathways will be very happy to just hear you say not this, and then slowly you'll inch your way toward what's better.
It reminds me, you had a Facebook post that you posted one of your journals when you were talking about, I think it was 13 or 14 days after Rhea had passed, and you were right, you were channeling love, and you were talking about City of Girls, it's going to be easy. Do you agree? And you had said, yes, I agree. I think in order to move forward, and in losing somebody like Rhea, who I think was your person, from what I understand, she was your one.
Yeah.
The incredible amount of creativity and ingenuity and imagination that you had in writing this book. Um, I bring this up because I wanted to maybe uh, go a little deeper in terms of discussing what your grieving process was like. So if you say, not this marriage, not this situation, not this career, whatever, what it is, it's not this. What is your grieving process for moving through that situation and then beyond? Because I look at you and say, I don't know how I would have gotten over that. It would have been soul crushing, body crushing, mind, everything. I would have been devastated. But then you wrote this incredible book. So maybe we can talk about what your grieving process looked like. Was there any intention behind it? Any conscious, intention that you were putting every day in the days after her passing?
Yes, I would love to talk about this. Can I call you back on my iPad? Because my phone is about to lose its
Yes,
last bit of battery.
of
I
course
guess
you can.
the Wi-Fi is so tricky here, it's just been burning through.
Oh, no
So I'm gonna
problem.
call that same exact number, and I'm just gonna
Yes,
call you on a different device in 1 minute, okay? And then
perfect.
I'll pick up that question.
You
Okay,
got it.
thanks.
There she is.
Hi again.
Hi.
I It actually didn't work on my iPad, but I found a plug for my phone, so we're good.
Oh,
Sorry about
no, it's
that.
fine. It's fine. So the question
Is this
on deck.
connection still good?
Yeah, it's great. And actually, I
Yep.
for whatever reason, I can actually see you a lot better now too, which is lovely. Yeah. So the question
Oh,
on deck.
okay, great. Um, it's about grieving.
Yes.
Okay, so many places that I could begin with this, but a couple things. I always want to be as honest and candid as I possibly can be about this because it's so complex and people suffer and struggle so much around death and dying and around grieving. And for some reason, I'm compelled to begin answering this question by addressing the fact that there can be a tremendous relief that you feel when somebody who you've been taking care of, who's been in a lingering, devastating, debilitating death experience finally dies.
Mhm.
And I think to be very honest, I just want to own that, because I think people feel very ashamed of that.
Mhm.
They feel very ashamed also of sometimes wishing that somebody would die. And I want to normalize that as much as possible, because it's so brutal. What Rhea was with without slightest doubt, the love of my life, the most important person I've ever known, the most irreplaceable person, um, the foundational person of my life, and that includes, it's beyond the people who raised me. That's beyond. She was my irreplaceable person. I would have said, if you had asked me before she got sick, who is the one person in the world you cannot live without, it was her.
Mhm.
Um, and I still have to deal with the trauma of living in this world without the one person in the world that I sometimes feel I can't live without. And her death was absolutely awful. She had pancreatic and liver cancer, which was awful enough, but she also was a recovered heroin addict who, when she went onto the opioids that were necessary for the pain management of her cancer, um, got triggered again on all of her old addictive behaviors. And so, layered on top of her already horrible dying, was losing the person I loved to addiction, which was something that I was expecting. Um, and there was the worst 6 months. I mean, the biggest nightmare that I've ever experienced. How do you deal with an addict who's dying? Um, you can't, like, what possible incentive would that person have to quit doing as many drugs, and
Right.
they're in pain, and how in the world do you, it's just this absolute emotional disaster. She ended up, shockingly, and it's a long and complicated story, but she ended up getting clean 2 months or a month before she died, and died as herself, which was extraordinary. But before that, it was a total nightmare. By the time she died, I was so shredded and destroyed at every level
Mhm.
that all I could feel was relief.
Mhm.
And I think and believe that anybody who's out there who's currently caring for somebody, and she wasn't an easy patient either. Not everybody is a lovely, gentle, easy patient. She was a very tough and willful person. So
Right.
we didn't have a pretty um, hallmark death.
Right.
She was a badass, fierce person. She had a badass, fierce death, and she took not just me, but a couple other people who had shown up to take care of her. She practically took us down with her.
Right.
So I
There's
think
relief.
that part of the
Yeah.
buoyancy that you feel when you're reading City of Girls is the buoyancy of somebody who's just been released from this brutal experience.
Right.
Um, and part of the joy that I felt in writing the book was being able to become myself again, remembering that I'm not just an exhausted caregiver, I'm also a novelist. And I don't just want to tell stories about bodies that are broken and destroyed by death, pain, and addiction. I also want to tell stories about pleasure and sensuality. And so there was something that was coming back to life in me through the writing of that book. So I want to start with that. That said, grieving isn't something that you can dodge. So the heavier grieving that I experienced with Rhea was actually after I'd finished writing City of Girls. Um, then that's when I fell apart more, and it's ongoing. But I'm not afraid of it. I'm. It's so funny. There's certain human experiences that I'm very scared of. Grieving isn't one of them. I'm very comfortable with sadness. Um, and so when I get waves of deep, painful sorrow and grief, I just let them rock me without resistance. There are other emotions that are much, much more difficult for me than this. Anger, for instance, is one that I don't know what to do with.
Mhm.
And the anger associated with the grieving of Rhea has been much more painful for me than the more beautiful, gentle, poignant loss of her. So, but grief is a bill that you have to pay eventually. It's a bill that you pay for loving as much as I loved her,
Which is
and I'm
different from
willing to
depression,
pay
I
that.
think, as well, isn't it? Like, it's grief
Totally.
and
I mean,
depression are
grief.
not the same thing.
Totally not. I mean, in the same way that desire, as we were talking about earlier, is dark and primal and
Mhm.
has a vibrant, electrifying energy, grief is a very living, powerful. Um, it's 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 depression is a shutting down and and a refusal and an inability to feel.
Mhm.
Actually, one of the things that you can use to pierce depression is grief.
Mm. Mhm.
Oftentimes depression is the refusal to grieve.
Mhm.
And so you can use the pain and the poignancy and the sorrow of grief as a higher energy field that can pierce the numbness and the apathy of depression. A lot of depression is just unfelt, unprocessed grief. So I didn't go into a depression when Rhea died, and I haven't, but I went into extreme waves of all sorts of emotions, anger, relief. There was a kind of ecstasy that I felt in having done a job, the hardest job I will ever do,
Mhm.
which was assisting her in her dying,
Mhm.
and knowing that I did it really well and that very few other people could have done it, knowing that I loved her too, that she died knowing that she was absolutely loved. Um, and and then the inevitable sorrow of knowing that that dynamic, foundational, extraordinary person who always made me feel like the world was the most fascinating place in the world, that the world was the most fascinating place in the world, that she will never again walk in the door and that I'll never have her counsel again.
Mhm.
It's extremely painful, but I wouldn't have missed a minute of it. I can absolutely tell you that. And even when the horror of it was happening and the nightmare of it was happening, I had this sense of knowing that I was in the right place, doing the right thing at the right time with the right person. And that's rare to know that.
And I think, I mean, I didn't know Rhea, but I would think that her desire for you after her passing would not be to shut down and only be consumed with your, grief and loss over her. And, very similarly to the book, like you have been able to, after a crushing loss, like losing somebody that important to you, you can still bounce back and have a wonderful life. You can find love as you have. There can be potential, on the other side of that if you choose to continue to live. If you choose not to be
Yeah.
consumed by it. And of course, I'm not saying that you should just like jump up and next, I love that you've taken your time and there's been waves of, intense feelings that you've just allowed yourself to surrender to. But you're still here, and I think that she would want, and anybody who's lost someone important to them, I think they would want you to continue living. They would want you to find love. They would
I'm
want you.
laughing because I do know Rhea, and I also know she kind of wanted me to die a little. You know what I mean? Like, I love that you give her that kind of like, she kind of wanted me to like,
She's like, bitch, you're coming with
she would
me.
like, she would like she would like to see that we were in a lot of pain about her death. Like whenever people say like, yeah, your loved one would want you to be happy, I'm like, no, I think Ray would want me to be little miserable enough to prove how much I loved her. Like, she wouldn't. One of the things that she was so afraid of, she wasn't much afraid of death, but one of actually, I think the only thing she was afraid of was missing out because she was so full of life and so full of vibrance. And I remember
Mhm.
one absolutely devastating moment where a couple of friends had come over to see her, and she would always rally to be with people because she was trying to suck every bit of life that she could out of her life. And had she was sick, she was always sick, she was dying, and at one point she said, I have to go to my bed and I have to lay down, but I don't want you guys to leave. I don't want you to shut down the party just because I'm going to bed. Stay
Mhm.
here, stay in the house, continue the dinner. I just have to go lay down. And I insist that you keep having fun. And I went to check on her a half an hour later, and she was sobbing into just sobbing. And she said, I'm just laying here in bed listening to you guys out there laughing and talking and having fun, and knowing that in a month or two, I'm never going to be part of that again. And you're
Mhm.
going to continue to laugh and have fun, and people will come into this house, and somebody else will be in this bed with you eventually as your lover, and you'll have joyful times, and it's killing me. And I was so devastated for her and that, and
Mhm.
I was so glad that she shared that and that she didn't
Yeah.
do the martyrdom thing of saying, I just want you to be happy. She was like, fuck you for getting to live when I get to have to die.
Right.
And I hate that the party will continue without me. And so there's a certain amount when I'm in these waves of deep, I just came to a beach that she loved that we used to go to, and I went and put her ashes in the water finally this year, and I did it by myself. And And it was a misty night, and there was nobody out on the beach, and I wrote her name in the sand and filled her name with her ashes and let the waves take it away, and just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And there was a part of me that was like, oh, Rhea, you love this. This is actually also what you want. Yes, you want me to move on, but you also want me to you kind of want to make sure that it's clear that I can't bear the world without you. And I think that that's also how we honor the people that we love when we die. And not by, of course I'm moving on, but of course I'm also shouting out to the universe, to her, I hate it that you're dead.
Yeah.
And I feel like somewhere her spirit wants that too. So
Hmm.
there's a part of the grieving, and I think that pre-colonial cultures get this, that part of the sort of extravagance of grieving is
Hmm.
how you show the dead person, we hate it that you're gone, we can't bear it, we're going to rip our clothes out, we're going to rip our hair off, we're going to
Right.
howl and scream, and then eventually we'll move on. But you have to do that big dramatic grieving for them as well as for you, so that they can know that they are irreplaceable. And that's exactly what she is and always will be.
I love that, and it's so honest and vulnerable. And I can tell you, I am similar to Rhea, and that I want people to be wailing at my in
Shit,
my
yeah. If
passing.
they're not wailing, you did something wrong in your life.
Yeah,
Like you don't want them to just go to Kentucky Fried Chicken an hour later and
yeah,
be all
be
right.
like,
Like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
want them to be okay, but like, yeah, it has to be felt. I mean, there's a hole in the world. There's a Rhea hole, and part of my way of honoring how much I loved her is to just stand in the naked, unvarnished truth of the fact that nothing and nobody can fill that hole. And one of the most comforting things anybody ever did for me was a friend of mine who I fell apart with shortly after Rhea was diagnosed, and I just fell into this wailing, keening meltdown. And I said, don't you dare. And she's very spiritual. And I said, there's two things I have to say. And if you contradict me on this, I will fucking kill you. One of them is, I will never love anybody as much as I love Drea. And don't you dare tell me that there's somebody who's going to step in and replace that, because it's not true. And you know it's true. And I know it's true. And she said, I know that's true. And instantly I felt the relief of the truth being spoken. And I said,
mhm,
and the second thing is, don't you dare tell me that she will always be with me in spirit, because she won't be here. Like, she won't be here. I will never get to kiss her again. I will never get to talk to her again. I will never get her advice again. She'll be gone. And my friend said, that is also true. She will be gone. And that is what death means. And and I was so grateful not to have somebody blow fairy dust and say,
right.
like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's the same. It is not the same. Having somebody dead is not the same as having them alive. And there is a level at which she's always with me. She's embroidered into my DNA. I've become this creature who's kind of half Rhea at this point. She belongs inside of me, and she's gone. And both of those things have to be admitted in order to experience, I think, both real grief and real moving on.
I just want to thank you for that. And I think your courage and vulnerability to speak the absolute truth around what it's like to lose someone. It sounds like I've never had to experience this. So I am sitting here as an empath listening to what it must be like. And it your vulnerability and your courageousness in sharing some of those darker thoughts as well around the buoyancy and the relief that you felt after her passing, and the waves that you feel even to this day. I think it gives other people permission, and it starts the conversation for them to also be talking about this, because I think you're right. I think there's a lot of shame, and I think there's a lot of, we think we need to act a certain way when somebody dies, and we just sort of have to shuffle on and get on with it. So I just want to thank you for that, and for this entire conversation, your honesty and your spoken word is just as beautiful as your written word. And I wanted to thank you for the time that you spent with us today.
Thank you so much. If I've done nothing else with my life, I just want to be a walking permission slip to make other people feel a little less crazed and weird about their own lives. And so thank you for thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that again, because that makes me feel safe and healthy and connected.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for what you do. And it's been absolutely beautiful talking to you.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to seeing you. I know you're gracing our stage in October, and this podcast will be coming out about a couple weeks before then. But really looking forward to seeing you in person. And thank you for your time today.
I'll see you there.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.